was really interesting. Does anyone want to kind of start the discussion? Yeah. Would you mind saying who you are as well, Leonie?
Leonie Denter from the SCI. And I was wondering how much opposition has there been against the sharing of economy and how widespread has it been? Because there's obviously the strong regulatory opposition in Germany that has just been taking place against Uber, where there was actually law intervention of
Germany can't even use the word.
Sorry?
I thought my understanding is that in Germany, for historical reasons, that even the word Uber has a negative connotation. There wasn't perhaps the appropriate.
I don't think that was really taken into account, but yeah, that's true. So yeah, is that a single case, or has that?
Oh no, it's been systemic.
Okay.
I mean, where you have the incumbent regime of taxi driving companies and the mainstay hotel operators aggressively resisting and trying to mobilize political pressure on municipal officials and regulatory authorities to clamp down on Uber and Lyft and Airbnb because they, with good reason, see it as being a threat to their own economic survival. On the other hand, you have cities trying to latch on to the sharing economy because it expresses a form of hipness and cities trying to present themselves as being technologically savvy, that you don't have to stand on the street corner trying to get a taxi, that you can, and the term that's used, you can e-hail a taxi from your home or office and then the car will show up. They've also done an excellent job of mobilizing their customer base as political advocates. So people who have become users of Uber and Lyft turn out at regulatory agency hearings where these issues are being sorted out. No, there's been, as transition theory would suggest, is that the incumbent regime is utilizing every resource at its disposal in order to beat back this insurgent competitor.
Okay. And Mike?
Can I just ask you if you could just say something about the second part of your talk and think back to one of the issues you raised in the first part of the talk. So you talked about sharing as moving efficiency from production to consumption. And in the first part of the talk, you talked about the role of government and the role of the state as pump priming, consumption in relation to production. How would you reflect on the role of the state in relation to the sharing economy? Is it potentially more sinister than some, in terms of a control function?
Yeah. No, I mean, at least in the U.S., the sharing economy proponents have embraced a certain kind of libertarian political philosophy. That they're very much intent on the strategies that they've implemented have been prompted by nobody's going to tell us what to do. They're not waiting for permission. They're setting up operations and then waiting to get shut down if that, in fact, is the political determination that's made. Or what sometimes has been referred to as not asking for permission, but not asking for permission up front, but asking for forgiveness after the fact. And that also sort of relying on a political discourse of technological determinism. That this is a better mousetrap. You don't have to stand out on the street in the rain waiting for a taxi that's never going to show up. Here, the car will send you a text message to let you know when it's here, and providing an enhanced form of convenience and comfort for customers.
So it relies on a relationship between these kinds of groups and organisations and the local state often in terms of creating the spaces to park, in terms of car sharing, to park the cars on local streets. Yeah, the car share. There's a very interesting ambivalence on the part of the car sharing companies these days about whether they've been sort of opportunistically lumped into the sharing economy.
they recognize that that their business model is not a sharing model. They've allowed allowed themselves to catch the wind, so to speak, of the sharing economy. But now that there has been some reversal in, at least around the edges of public impressions of what the sharing economy is all about, you find things on the Zipcar website sort of renouncing their allegiance to the sharing economy, that don't lump us in under this sort of share washing category, because that's not what we're doing. We've been involved in providing an enhanced form of convenience to our customers, superior service and so forth, based on short-term rental, and we're really not part of those sharing guys. So they've been, car sharers, I think, have tried to have it both ways, and to some degree, you're trying to get a little bit out ahead of the critique of the sharing economy, because if this all goes flat, they're trying to create some distance so they don't get overwhelmed by it as well.
David?
Thank you, I really enjoyed that. First, as a kind of comment, really, as you were talking, it kind of brought to mind some work that was come out of cultural studies, well, cultural geography, really, about 10 years ago, on second-hand consumption. I wondered if you'd engaged with any of that at all, because it seems to be making a parallel set of arguments to the ones you're making here, and you might find that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of much more conscious and aware of that sort of 10 years ago, when and was closely connected to sort of the cultural studies facet of geography. Interestingly, by coincidence, I don't know if somebody else got it today as well, there was an email message that caught my attention from Mike Goodman, geographer at Reading, announcing a session that he and someone else are organizing at the American Association of Geographers meeting, that seems to be trying to pull some of this work in cultural studies and geography into this conversation. And what caught my attention is they used the term in their characterization of the session that they were organizing, they used the term post-consumerism. So I kind of have my antenna, or sort of out looking for that type of invocation.
And this segues into the next kind of question, really, in that hoping you could say a little bit more, again, asking you to bring back where you arrived, which I thought was great, the way you started. So really, where does this leave? You have that kind of development, from agrarian society to consumerism. Where does this leave consumerism? Did you expect or hope for this to be some kind of ideological antidote to consumerism? Yeah. Is it presented in that way by people who are proponents of it?
Yes, very much so. And I sort of got originally into this being kind of seduced by that idea, that that this kind of facile interpretation, I think, that exists within sustainability circles and that we've heard about, for so long, that forsaking ownership, and that once you move beyond ownership and create shared utilization schemes, that other interesting sustainability opportunities begin to emerge. So I was infected by that in the same way that I think many other people were. But what has happened, I think, especially in the United States, is that this, development, which is really, a development that comes out of the internet, which is, makes transactions that were previously cumbersome and complicated, if not impossible to make. It makes them relatively easy because you can now do these things in the palm of your hand. It's really being driven by venture capital, and that the allusion to sustainability, which you saw sort of earlier on, particularly some of the clothing sharing websites, played around early on with this idea that it was a greener practice. You don't see any of that anymore. No. And part of that is, the counsel that they've received from their venture capital backers is, don't talk about that stuff. It's about access to a new form of fast fashion that's ordinarily expensive, because now it's not just the product at Zara that you get for £5. You can rent a Chanel suit for a modest amount of money for a week or two. So it's opening up the world of luxury goods to a community of people that was never able to afford it. Now, some may say that's a great thing, we're democratizing luxury goods, but from a sustainability standpoint, it's, I think, a very dangerous path to go down.
Thank you very much, fascinating. I suppose John Maynard Keynes would say that this is just a demand is too slack problem, and there's ways of increasing aggregate demand. I suppose my question is more about the different threats to different incumbent regimes, because there's taxi companies are threatened in a different way than, say, book publishers are threatened by Amazon. That's not a particularly good example here, but are we going to see, in your opinion, different strategies besides just trying to regulate the insurgents out of existence, just to co-opt them, just to outcompete them in their own business model?
Well, I mean, you've seen that
ways.
already. So Zipcar was bought by Avis, a precursor of Lyft, its name escapes me, was bought by an American car rental company called Enterprise. I sort of have this idea in the back of my head that one of the major hotel chains is going to buy up Airbnb. They're going to come to the realization, why do we need to, maintain real estate and fix roofs and, deal with plumbing problems? Push that down the pipe to, literally, to this cadre of informal hoteliers who provide the accommodation for them, and Hilton just collects a brokerage fee for arranging the overnight stay. I mean, for years, Avis and the other car rental companies said, no way, we're not, and then, one day you woke up and the world was different. So it's not inconceivable to me that, that the guys behind Airbnb will decide that they've got a better offer. And you see, H&M is getting involved now in sharing. I mean, so they may come to the determination that, rather than trying to create their own operation from the ground up, we'll just buy somebody else that's proven themselves as being reasonably successful.
We've got, some people might want to leave, but we've got a lot of questions lined up, so we're basically going to continue, but I know some of you do need to go at 5:30, then make your exit whenever you feel comfortable doing so. Chris?
So, I have a question, but just briefly on what you just said. I guess in hotels, there's already a kind of mixture of business models anyway. I mean, not all hotel chains own their assets, own the hotels. And so I'm sure most of them outsource maintenance already. So, in some ways, if you put an Airbnb sign up on your house, you're not far off being, a hotel in an existing business model for some hotel chains, I guess. But I was going to ask you whether you see some of what's going on under this sharing economy label as almost formalising what might already be happening in terms of people making money out of assets they own in the black economy or the grey economy. Because if you want, it used to be that if you wandered around in the middle of the night, and people would stop their car, ask you if you wanted if you needed a taxi, and perhaps there's some formalising of that activity going on.
Yeah, and then providing, some element of greater security. So at least there's the impression that the drivers are being vetted and there's some security scan taking place. And Airbnb is now creating a staff to basically do home inspections as a means of providing some quality assurance to its clients, and recognizing that the rating system that they presently use of assigning sort of an Amazon like 1 to 5 stars you know, on the basis of how well did you like your hotel host, you know, isn't sufficient, and that some kind of third-party inspection and validation, authentication process is ultimately going to be necessary in order to prevent slipshod operators from, you know, tarnishing their brand. I don't know if that gets to your question. Lost the thread.
Well, it does indicate that there's a, you know, as people build their brand, it's always, the brand is quite important, isn't it? You know, it's because perhaps as the brand gets bigger and more visible, so they have to come closer to something that's kind of conventional, even if they don't own the asset itself.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the case of the ride-sharing companies, it's, I mean, there's a bit of a distinction that Uber kind of puts itself out there as being the sort of mean insurgent. You know, that we're the ones that are really sort of shaking things up, and this cozy little industry that is developed around urban taxi cabs is in desperate need of disruption. Lyft takes a little bit more of a sort of friendlier approach, but the guys behind Lyft, you know, I think have a little bit more of their heart in the right place, and recognize that they are simply providing an alternative taxi service, and that from a, you know, reduction in vehicle miles traveled, or the reduction in urban vehicle fleets, that's not happening. That instead of calling the local taxi, you're, you know, using your smartphone to contact them. And let me come back to the question earlier about what the sort of response of the incumbents may be, is that, you know, somebody will come along and provide a web-based platform for local taxi cab companies to plug into as a way of providing essentially the same type of interface as Uber.
Sorry, if I just may say, this has been launched in Brazil and is the most valuable online operation right now in my country.
All right.
Exactly giving the taxi drivers the chance to do that and keeping their jobs. So
Right.
they install an app on their mobile, they have their mobile in front of their car, and they answer to this online calls that they go.
Right. Yeah.
It's exactly, it's the most successful online operation right now in Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that if I was the guys behind Uber or Lyft, that would be the thing that would keep me awake most at night, because I mean, they don't. I mean, this is sort of the beauty of the business model, is they don't own anything. All they have is their platform, and all it takes is a weekend and a couple of good programmers to create the equivalent, and their market advantage then disappears quite quickly, I would think.
Sally just passed over the management to me.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's Gary next.
Yeah, just a quick question really, and it sort of relates a lot to other questions that have already been asked. But it seems to me it's debatable whether this may be, the sharing economy may be a sort of new regime, many new regimes or evolving regimes. But what I think we can agree on is that it's dangerous, creates hyperinflation, as you said. Hyperinflation, consumption. I guess I'm just wondering, how do we stop these? Have you got any ideas? It seems to me like a process is just being unleashed, and it's got a sort of momentum of its own, and it's often what's like, so socio-technical systems and process of locking are talked about. The question often then is, well, how do we stop these sort of?
Well, and I think it's probably its most powerful and valuable asset is the positive valence that surrounds it. You know, that this is edgy, and it's technologically sophisticated, it's hip, and as a result, you know, from the insurgent side, is that that's having a powerful neutralizing effect on the power of incumbents. Because especially in cities like New York or San Francisco, while there is a recognition of the regulatory responsibility, there's also this perception, probably correct, that regulatory agencies are being the bad guys by limiting or shutting down these activities. One of the more perverse examples that the country of Korea has promoted itself, as the not Korea, it's Seoul, city of Seoul, as the global sharing city. Yet they have prevented Uber and Lyft from setting up shop in the city. This is sort of fascinating, particularly for those of you interested in the transition dynamics of niche regime conflicts. I think this provides a great, very timely and contemporary research project because these processes are playing out differently in different places. And I think there's opportunity for some useful case studies as to, why does Uber get regulatory permission in city A but not in city B? And this is all, being played out in real time. I mean, it's quite a job to sort of stay on top of the kind of range of regulatory battles going on in different places.
Right, Vicky?
I think my question is probably so building on what everyone else has said, but I'm interested in this. So coming back from background from the Economics Foundation, where we have had a very sort of, I guess, kind of utopian view of what that sharing economy was, and I found the kind of quadrant very useful because I'd always we'd always talked about it being in that kind of far right-hand corner, sort of this collective consumption and so on. And so it's interesting for me to sort of see how again from some of the work the method done on the caring economy and sort of in time sharing, how that's then being co-opted by the big society and voluntary work and sort of basically the state being able to kind of shift responsibilities to society. And again, just the kind of the social justice elements that you're drawing out in terms of the freelancing model, I think is again very interesting. It's not something I've really thought about before. One thing I was wondering if you could do is possibly reflect on some of the macroeconomic consequences of this kind of hyper-consumption, because again, sort of struggling to kind of think about it, but I suppose I always assumed the kind of sharing economy was sort of there's actually a reduction in consumption, and the economic model as it is now, that would be quite catastrophic. But so this hyper-consumption, obviously that would just then cause this kind of downward spiral into kind of complete, throughput overload, I guess. So I wonder if you just wanted to reflect on some of those kind of macroeconomic consequences of it kind of, really becoming a dominant model, economic model, I suppose.
Well, I think for most participants, both on the service provider side as well as on the user side, most of the kind of solidaristic and communitarian sensibilities that perhaps provided the birthing ground for these ideas, that's not relevant. People use these services because they stay in Airbnb because it's, they can get a cheap flight to New York and it's cheaper than spending $250, $300 a night on a commercial hotel. And so, in the case of Airbnb, it's had a powerfully stimulative effect on travel because it's reduced the price of a week-long holiday in Los Angeles or San Francisco. I even had a student who reported back to me at the end of last semester where she emailed me sort of mid-summer saying, "Thanks so much for telling me about Airbnb. I just had a great time in Florida, and there's no way I would have been able to afford to go if it wasn't for being able to stay under those, under that kind of arrangement." And you hear those kinds of stories all the time. And in fact, Airbnb promotes those kinds of stories on its website. That this is lowering the cost of long-distance travel. And, you know, and it's sort of presented from the standpoint, well, look, we live in tough economic times. This enables people to, you know, pursue activities that they may not otherwise be able to afford to do. But, you know, from a financial standpoint, you know, let's let the sustainability stuff all fall to the side. I mean, and just look at it as a hard cash transaction. I mean, it's lowering the price of access to goods. So anything we know about economics, it's going to increase demand. And, you know, that's very much, I think, what we're seeing.
Depressingly, 0 hours contract kind of mentality with it as well. But anyway, sorry. There's 3 more questions, I think, that I've got at the moment. Andy, yourself, and then if you want to collect, or should we start with Andrew and then just finish with that? Is everyone happy?
I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah.
Well, maybe these points have been kind of dealt with already, actually. I mean, my first kind of thought is related to David's comments earlier, actually, about the kind of connection between the first half of your presentation and the second half. I mean, by the way, I completely got a lot of sympathy with your kind of scepticism about the sharing economy idea. But what's interesting is that you sort of set up the presentation in the first half as being one of kind of signals of the shift from a mass consumerist logic of social organisation to something else, which you said could be post-consumerism, or maybe you're not quite happy with that term, but nevertheless it could be a shift. And yeah, I think the discussion we've had in your second half of the presentation seems to be suggesting exactly the opposite. It's an intensification of that mode of social organisation. So I just wondered how you were going to deal with this in the context of your wider book project, where you have what appears to be a countervailing threat, quite dramatic. The second part, that relates to it slightly, but see, I mean, I've been as baffled as you are about the notion of sharing that is used here and how counterintuitive it is. So I think your 2x2 matrix is, you know, very useful for that, in the sense that surely anything above the axis, and the axis can't be shared because of the cumulative aspects of it, really. So you've only really got the bottom right-hand corner. And when you get to the bottom right-hand corner, that seems to be really based on stuff that isn't talked about in the current rhetoric around the sharing economy, which is traditional public services via redistribution, taxation, and reciprocity between, you know, within communities, which are very, very old ways of economic integration being established. So there's something very odd about all of these, you know, the whole thing, which I think is what you've been saying. So I suppose it may be more of a comment than a question, apart from the first bit, which is how you square the two.
I'll flag one other sort of observation, is that there also seems to be, at least based on conversations I've been having with people over the last 6 or 8 months, a bit of a transatlantic divide, that lower right-hand corner is a little bit more robust on this side of the pond than it is on the other side.
Yeah.
And we maybe, you know, shouldn't be surprised by that. That the communitarian solidaristic dimensions of sharing, and there are examples, you know, much more prevalent than I've given airing to, that seem to exist on the European side, much less so on the North American side. But they are there, and they've been overshadowed in this overall conversation. And in the larger project, there will be an opportunity to try to breathe some life into the solidaristic expressions of sharing. And I think really quite taken by the comment that you've made about sort of the old-fashioned nature of sharing. I mean, we didn't call the creation of municipal bus services as sharing, but it's very much
Publicly owned railways and health services and things like that.
Where government becomes the provider, you know, rather than a internet startup that's been juiced up on venture capital.
Exactly.
Is part of the appeal and the power that it, in some ways, allows the squeezed middle to start making a bit of extra income from their assets, which is sort of one of the few things that the middle class have got.
Yeah.
We can't get income anymore, but we have got some assets, so we kind of, you know, that's...
And that becomes a very tricky space for Airbnb to navigate, because I think there's a patent recognition that, you know, people who go into business, you know, as casual hoteliers, you know, are doing it because they need to make an extra buck and they've got to cover the mortgage at the end of the month. You know, it's that kind of economic motivation that's compelling them. But, you know, that's not the attention, and that's not the point that Airbnb, you know, needs to or can draw attention to. So they've created this whole elaborate narrative about, you know, belonging to community. You know, it's the sort of thing you'd read like in, I don't know, like the Rough Guide. Yeah. You know, that's, you know, you're being, by hosting people in your, you know, back bedroom, you know, you're creating a window on global society, and, you know, you never know what sort of interesting people are going to walk through your door. You know, despite the fact that you're getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to make pancakes for them, so that, you know, they don't give you a negative rating when the door closes behind them. But no, it's very much the case that, you know, the people who were, I mean, we haven't talked, probably one of the uglier angles on the sharing economy is something called TaskRabbit. Familiar with TaskRabbit? TaskRabbit is basically an employment broker. That if you want somebody to go and pick up a bag of donuts for you, or you want somebody to wash your car, or you want somebody to put your accounting records straight before you prepare your end-of-year financial report, you put an announcement on TaskRabbit and say, I'll pay £5 an hour for somebody to do this job, and then the responses come pouring into your inbox. And what happens is that the service providers, or what are referred to as TaskRabbits, bid against each other to drive down the hourly rate. So if somebody says, no, you don't need to pay me $5, I'll do it for $4. I mean, just a horrific, you know, dynamic. But this, you know, has been incorporated as, people refer to it as a dimension of the sharing economy.
Actually, thanks very much for the presentation. My question is actually related to two previous questions that has been asked about how can we stop the sharing economy. And my question is, why do we need to stop it? The impression that I has got is that the empty promise is coming from the fact that by the sharing economy, we are diverting the resources, we are creating some cost savings, and these are using for additional sort of consumption. But what sort of hard evidence do we have to say that really it's an empty promise? And if this is not available, what sort of measures are we looking for to prove or that it's not just an empty promise? What is it that we are looking for to say that it is not really an empty?
So you're saying, sort of, where is the data to sort of back up what I'm saying?
Yeah, is there any evidence to support that it is an empty promise? And if it is not available, what should we be looking at? Because I can't see really the danger of it. It's not only consumption, that sustainability means consuming less, but there are other different forms of consumption that can lead to the sustainability idea. But the impression that I'm getting here is that no, it's consuming less, all what we need, and sharing economy is just pushing the idea of cost savings that will be diverted to more consumption.
Yeah, no, I think there's an opportunity here for a whole room full of PhD dissertations to answer those questions through real, careful, qualitative and quantitative analysis. It's been done to some degree for the car sharing, and the results are conflictive and ambivalent. I'm somewhat cynical because I think that particularly the German car companies know precisely what they're doing in investing in car sharing. They don't see it as a sustainability strategy. They don't see it as a way of cutting the number of cars that they sell. Car sharing is still car driving, and Daimler and BMW and so forth, and they don't care whether you buy the car or somebody else buys the car and you use the car. You're still immersed in an entirely car-reliant, car-dependent lifestyle. And they see it, as a way of competing against public transportation. So if you happen to be at some point in the not-so-distant future in Berlin, outside the central Berlin rail station, there are dozens and dozens of shared cars parked out on the street. And when there's an announcement that such and such train is going to be late, people flood out to pick up a car to go. I think there's also, again, this is kind of anecdotal, so your point is very well taken, is that for members of the millennial generation, car sharing provides an entry point for, it's training people to be car drivers and to become accustomed to the idea of having a car. So much the same way that the car manufacturers sell their vehicles to the regular rental companies at deeply discounted prices because they see it as a way for people to try out their model car on a relatively risk-free basis. Car sharing is being operationalized by the automobile companies in the same way. It's training people to use an alternative to public transportation and moving them to the point that a little further down, they will come to buy a car. But I think that it's very difficult, because you're talking about a system. And you're changing one of the parameters of the system. And in order to answer the question that you're posing in an accurate and comprehensive way, you need to trace out all of the secondary and tertiary effects of the initial change. So far, when most of those studies are conducted, they're just looking at what the primary effect is. They're not looking at what happens, what the subsequent rebounds are. Same thing with, there's a German PhD student at the Copenhagen Business School who I work with, who's looking at this from the clothes sharing perspective. So this is a very ripe area for using sort of tools and techniques that we have available, life cycle analysis that traces out these ramifying impacts as widely as we can in order to capture the secondary and subsequent impacts. So
and maybe we also need new way of thinking about new models to enable us to assess these.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage you that there was an excellent talk was given by John Sturman 2 weeks ago in Boston. And the recording, the video, is on the SCORI website. Wonderful presentation of sustainable consumption from a systems dynamics perspective. You all remember, from having read Limits to Growth, the system dynamics diagrams of the arrows and the boxes and the flow diagrams. This was a wonderful presentation of sustainable consumption as we understand it, embedded within the elaborate narrative of a systems flow diagram. So it's you'll find the video on the SCORI website. It's absolutely brilliant.
Okay, maybe we should kind of break off, but we've got one. I know people want to carry on discussing, and I don't want to stop people from carrying on discussing, but I also know that a lot of people